Hello friends, hope you are doing good. In this video, let us understand what are the tools which are available to create services or resources on the Azure cloud. The main tool which is provided by Microsoft is the portal itself. Once you log into the portal using your credentials, you will be able to connect to Azure cloud and create services or resources. The other tool which is provided by Azure is there are two CLI tools which are available to create resources. One is PowerShell, the other one is Azure CLI. These two CLI tools works on both Windows as well as Linux. Once you install PowerShell or Azure CLI, you need to install the modules for the PowerShell, and Azure CLI as built-in modules so that it will interact with the Azure cloud to create the services. There is another way to create resources, which is by using the VS Code. VS Code is an IDE tool wherein there are multiple extensions which are available. Using the VS Code, you can simply install the extensions for PowerShell or Azure CLI, and you can keep all your files, all your scripts, everything in the VS Code itself. From VS Code, you will be able to connect to Azure, then create services. When using VS Code, it is very easy to maintain and manage all your files and folders in one place, so that it will be very easy to keep track of whatever resources you are creating. So once you log into the portal, this is how you will see the portal, and from there you will be able to create the resources once you connect to the Azure management portal. I have already installed the Visual Studio Code, and this is the Visual Studio Code from where I will be creating the commands to execute onto the Azure cloud to create virtual machines or virtual networks, subnets. All the resources I will be able to create by supplying the commands from the Visual Studio Code itself. In order to get extensions for the Azure CLI or for the PowerShell, you need to come to the Visual Studio Code and click on the gear icon here and select the extensions. Once you click on the extensions, search for Azure CLI. This is provided by Microsoft. You can simply install the Azure CLI tools. I have already installed, and search for PowerShell. This is also provided by Microsoft. If it is not installed, you can install. I have already installed PowerShell extension, and search for ARM, Azure ARM tools. This is also I have already installed. If it is not installed, you can install all these extensions so that it will be very easy and useful for you to run the commands, and it will automatically pop up the syntax for the commands. So all these CLI tools as an IntelliSense, which will understand what is the next syntax which you wanted to use in your command line. Let us now install the Azure CLI. I am in learn.microsoft.com, and there is a link where you can install the Azure CLI. If you browse this web page, you will be able to find the link to download the latest release of the Azure CLI. I'll download the Azure CLI 64-bit and let it download. I can see the file has been downloaded, and I will install the Azure CLI. It will be a straightforward installation. Just you need to click on install and it will start installing. It will take some time to install the Azure CLI. The CLI installation is complete. Click on finish. Once you have installed the Azure CLI, browse through the website and you will be able to see there is a command to interact with the Azure CLI. This command is nothing but AZ version. If you enter AZ version, it should be able to give the details of the Azure CLI version, what you have installed. We are able to see that there is a AZ version which has run successfully and the version of the CLI it is showing. In case if you wanted to upgrade the AZ CLI, we have to use the command AZ upgrade to upgrade the AZ CLI command. Whatever tools you might be using to interact with the Azure cloud, you are basically using something called as API calls. Microsoft will be releasing API codes very frequently. That is why you need to use the PowerShell Azure Resource Module and the Azure CLI tool to the latest version so that the API what Microsoft has released to interact with the Azure cloud will be used by your Azure Resource Module or your Azure CLI so that there will be no command line syntax error or you don't have any problems while creating your resources or services. Since we have already installed the Azure CLI tool, if you come to the documentation section of the Azure Cloud Shell, and you will be able to see what are the commands which you can run from the CLI. I will run some of the commands. This time I will be running all these commands from the Visual Studio Code itself because I wanted to see if the Visual Studio Code is able to interact with the Azure CLI tool which we have installed so that using the Visual Studio Code, it will talk to the Azure CLI and again this Azure CLI will then interact with the Azure Cloud Services. Let me copy. Before that login, I wanted to check if I am able to get the output for AZ version. Let me open the Visual Studio Code and enter the command AZ version. Now we are able to see that this command works fine from the Visual Studio Code. Now, if I enter AZ and press enter, it will give me the list of the commands which are used to interact with the Azure cloud. So these are the list of the commands. These are the main commands and there are subsection of the commands which you need to use, and each section and subsection again with the syntax you can interact with the Azure cloud to create any resources. So let me check the login. There is a login. This is the login command which I can use to log into the Azure. Simply enter AZ login. This will open the authentication page and I need to provide the email address, my training 1990 at hotmail.com. Oh, thanks. Now it says that I have already logged into the Azure And if I want to check out the Azure CLI documentation, I can click the documentation page. It will bring back to the old website where I was checking the Azure CLI commands. If you don't want to install the PowerShell or the Azure CLI on your desktop or your laptop, there is an option provided within the portal itself. When you log into the portal.azure.com, there is an option given here to open the Cloud Shell. This Cloud Shell, when you open, it will ask whether you wanted to use the Bash or PowerShell. It will create a storage account. Once it creates the storage account, you will be able to see the command prompt for the Azure CLI tool. From there, you will be able to run all the commands to interact with the Azure cloud. So let us wait and see how much time it is taking to create the storage account. Once the storage account is created, you will be able to see the command prompt. Still it is connecting to the terminal. Let it connect. Yeah. Now it is in the command prompt. Good thing about Cloud Shell is there is no need to authenticate again because you have already authenticated to the portal.azure.com. From here, you are accessing the Cloud Shell. Apart from the Bash, if you select PowerShell, you will be able to use the PowerShell from the Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell is basically a interaction tool which is provided by Microsoft Azure, which has both the Bash as well as the PowerShell. Bash is nothing but your Cloud CLI tool. PowerShell is nothing but your Azure ARM modules. So let me go back to the Bash and confirm. If I type just AZ and enter, it will give me the list of all the commands which I can use to interact with the Azure Cloud Services. So there are so many commands which I can use along with the AZ command. If I enter AZ VM list, it has to tell what are the VMs which are already provisioned. Because I don't have any VMs created, it will not tell anything. It simply says no VMs. If I wanted to create a resource group, I have to enter. Let me clear the screen. And if I wanted to increase the font large, I can select the font here, large font. You can see there is also an option for the Visual Studio Code. You can open the Visual Studio Code, which is the code editor, and you will also see an option to create files, upload the file, download the file. So whatever files you have already created on your computer, you can upload those scripts and files and bring it to the Cloud Shell. Use those files to run those scripts or commands. And also you can download the scripts again. So I am into the new terminal again. If I click this button, it will open the new session. So I am into the new session here. Let me enter AZ group create, and I need to mention the location. Location is East US, and resource group, resource dash group. The name of the resource group is demo RG001. I am simply testing the command using the Azure Cloud CLI, and I am simply executing this command to create the resource group. So let us try and see if it works fine or not. Yes, fantastic. So it has created. If I wanted to list the group, whatever I have created, I can simply enter AZ group list. So this is the group which we have created. This group name will be somewhere it was here. So this is the group name which we have created, and with the same command, if I say output as table, it will show the output in table format. So this is how you will interact with Azure Cloud Services using the Cloud CLI tool. Let us see in the portal what is the status of the resource group which we have created using the Cloud Shell. So there is the resource group which is created, and the location is East US. So we are able to see the resource group which is created using the Cloud Shell.